Welcome to Garden Party, everybody. As you know, we're your virtual series from the Southern California News Group to give you tips and tricks and insights into getting the most joy and productivity out of your gardening experience, and also maybe help you find a community of like-minded green thumbs, or in my case, a wannabe green thumb. Today, we'll be talking about all things pollinator with our gardening columnist, Joshua Siskind, as usual. Just so you know, I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor of premium content for the Southern California News Group. I wore my Pollinator shirt today. I want to say thank you to our Reader Rewards subscribers and really to all of you who've made our virtual program so popular. And by the way, if you are a Reader Rewards subscriber attending today, you're automatically entered to win a $100 gift certificate to Home Depot, which should come in handy. And if you're not a subscriber, why aren't you a subscriber? Go to scng.com/subscribe and find your local paper and join us as a subscriber. Before we get started, as usual, I need to tell you a few things. If you're an attendee, you're muted, but if you have questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on the Zoom toolbar on your screen. And certainly if you want to make comments, you can use the chat feature found there as well. But if for your questions, please do use the Q&A. We've got SCNG's feature editor, Vanessa Franco. Hey, Vanessa, behind the scenes, and she's monitoring questions and comments, and she's going to respond as much as possible. This question, what am I talking about? This session will be videotaped and a link is going to be sent to you so you can share it or just revisit some of the amazing information you're about to receive. It's also going to be posted at scng.com/virtual events. And there you can find all of our past virtual shows and see also what's coming up next. Now, it is my pleasure, as always, to introduce our resident expert, Joshua Siskind. He's the gardening columnist at the LA Daily News and SCNG since 1993. Joshua holds a master's degree in horticulture from UC Davis, and he's also been a landscaping and gardening practices instructor for the Los Angeles Unified School District and UCLA Extension, and owned his own landscape management company. He's written a book too. It's called Green Plants Under Smoggy Skies, a guide for the Los Angeles gardener. And what's more, he's also been a licensed psychotherapist. So as I like to say, maybe that's why he's good at getting to the root of our gardening issues. Haha. Anyway, hello, Joshua. Are you there? Hey,
yeah,
hey, stranger. So our topic today,
I'm here.
Good. Okay, so our topic today, and I'm really interested in this, is the pollinators, how the birds and the bees help the flowers and the trees. Yeah. So let's talk about some of the basics. First of all, can you just run us through quickly, what is pollination?
Yeah, well, pollination is about seeds, right? That if we didn't have pollination, we wouldn't have seeds. And if we didn't have seeds, we wouldn't have plants. So it's really that simple. The truth of the matter is, just about every single plant is pollinated, right? And no matter what you plant in your garden, if you plant, the point is to plant a diversity of flowers, because the more different shapes and sizes and colors of flowers that you have, the more different insects will come and pollinate your plants and produce seeds, and so that the chain of life will continue. Now, the actual process begins with the petals that attract the insects, and more often than not, we're talking about honeybees, but other insects as well, which we'll get into. And what happens is that these insects, so the honeybees in particular, are interested in nectar. They're also interested in pollen, but their main interest in coming to a flower is to suck up nectar, which is produced in nectaries. You can see on this diagram at the base, they're nectaries that are kind of like, you could call them floral glands that produce nectar. And so the bee goes down into the base of the petals, and it sucks up the nectar. On its way down, however, it also collects pollen, which it uses for feeding its young. The pollen is formed on those little, they look like heads of antennae. They're called anthers, and their bodies brush against the pollen. And so on the way down, they select the nectar, and then on the way back up, or maybe even on the way down, their bodies brush against that looks like an hourglass figure, which is the female part of the flower, right? And the pollen is on the very top of that hourglass. And what happens is the pollen grain begins to grow, and it grows all the way down the length of what's called a style, which is that tube through the female part.
All of my biology class is coming back now.
Yeah,
So
right.
yeah, so it goes down in there.
Yeah, it landed on the stigma. The stigma is the female part. Easy to remember, stigma, female. Anyway, so it lands there, it goes out, and the pollen tube grows, and what happens is it releases male genetic material into the ovule. Actually, there are more than one ovule. There are many ovules. Like in a tomato, you see a lot of seeds. So each one of those seeds represented one ovule and one pollen grain. But so anyway, the seeds begin to grow, and as the seeds grow, then the ovary, right, which is the sort of the pear-shaped part of the female flower part, that ovary turns into a fruit. Okay, but the seed sends out hormones that make the fruit grow. That's the point. But the fruit is really a side issue. In other words, why does the plant grow a fruit? The plant grows a fruit only to attract animals that will eat the fruit. Birds are animals that will eat the fruit and spread the seed around, right?
So it's propagation itself, right? All about survival.
It's all about survival, yeah.
Yeah. So moving on. Who are
yeah. So here's this is a fascinating point. I mean, this is a philosophical discussion. The pollination is an unintended consequence of nectar foraging, except for one insect, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But in other words, the honeybee that's interested in pollen because it feeds its young, it's interested in the pollen is a source of protein for larvae, for bee and other insect larvae. And the nectar is a source of energy, right? It turns into honey eventually, but it's used as an energy source. But the bees do not go out of their way to rub against the stigma, the female part of the flower, in order to pollinate. It just happens, either going down to forage for nectar or on their way up, they pass over it. But there's nothing intentional about it. And the same thing is true of birds, like hummingbirds, for instance. Their beaks, right, as they go down to
get the
lap up the nectar, their beaks get covered with pollen. Then they go to this flower, they go to another flower, and the pollen rubs off when they dip their beak down again to get some more nectar. So that's it.
Fascinating. So talk about these pollinators. One of the fascinating things when we went through this slide before was learning that flies are also pollinators, and beetles, creatures I didn't think about.
Yeah, right. So flies, something that's near and dear to everyone's heart is chocolate. Well, you need to know that chocolate is pollinated exclusively or nearly exclusively by midges, which are a miniature kind of fly.
Changes.
So flies. You don't normally associate chocolate with flies, but I think it's a beautiful thing. And actually, the flies, there are many different types of flies, but even house flies, if you put them in the garden, you will see them flitting from flower to flower. So they are interested, because nectar is an energy source for insects of every kind.
Fascinating. And also beetles. Can you talk about
beetles? Yeah. So people aren't aware of this, but 25% of all the animals on Earth are beetles, and 40% of insects. Beetles were around a long time before butterflies and honeybees, and that's why so many plants are pollinated by them. Something in particular that people are familiar with would be magnolias, because that's a primitive plant. That it's probably one of the first flowering plants before there were butterflies or bees. There were magnolia trees. And also the California spice bush is another one. They're attracted to spicy fragrances and strongly scented flowers.
So as opposed to some of the others that are attracted to the colors of the flowers.
Right, very well put. Yeah, exactly. So
I wanted to also point out the yucca moth. You were talking about that.
Okay, so there's something unique. The yucca moth is the only insect that intentionally pollinates a flower.
Fascinating.
And what yuccas are desert plants, many native to California.
Yeah.
The Joshua tree, of course. Yucca brevifolia is the most famous. So what happens is this: the yucca moth, when it comes to a flower, it takes the pollen, okay, between its legs, and it brings it to the female part of the flower, and it deposits it there.
Yeah.
And why does it do that? Because it lives in symbiosis with the yucca. And what happens is the seeds begin to grow inside the ovary of the yucca. And as that happens, the moth will insert its ovipositor into this ovary and deposit its eggs there. So as the eggs turn into larvae and start to grow, the larvae will feed on the seeds of the yucca that are growing. Now, it won't eat all the seeds because obviously the plant needs to perpetuate itself, but it will eat some of the seeds. And so the only way that the larvae of the yucca moth can survive is by eating those seeds. But then the yucca couldn't survive without the moth, because that's what pollinates it. Nothing else. There's only one species of yucca moth to each species of yucca.
This is fascinating. We could talk about this all day. I just want to, before we get to the very important other pollinators, I wanted to just mention really quick the warbler that was on the last slide.
Okay. So it turns out that this is a pollinator of the bird of paradise, Strelitzia originae. Everybody knows of the bird of paradise. So that and we could probably spend a half an hour talking about how that process works. But
that's fascinating. They have their own particular pollinator. I thought that was interesting. Okay, I'm sorry. Right. We can move on.
No, we can keep going. So these are pollen eaters, right? There aren't a lot of insects that are pollinated. Almost all insects, when you talk about flowers and attracting pollinators, you're talking about attracting them because they want the nectar. Okay, that's what they're really interested in. But there are some insects that actually eat the pollen. Bees and wasps take the pollen back to their nests and they feed it to the larvae. Right? It's a food source. It's a protein source. Beetles will eat the pollen straight out of the plant, and orb weaver spiders will eat pollen that's trapped in their webs. These are the beautiful spiders you see in your garden. So they're pollen eaters. And last but not least, mites, which are tiny little creatures. Particularly, there are predaceous mites. There are good mites that eat pestiferous mites. But if the pestiferous mites are not abundant in an area, then the mites will eat the pollen in the flowers. And mites also hitchhike on the backs of beetles and honeybees. They're tiny little things, right. And so they will benefit from the visitations of the beetles and the bees.
Well, fascinating as mites might be, let us move to other creatures. Flowers that attract, the flowers.
Right. So we're talking we're talking about color. It turns out that bees are especially attracted to the ultraviolet spectrum of color, which means purple, means violet, means blue. So their preferred flowers are going to be these colors. It doesn't mean they're not going to visit others. They're going to visit probably every other flower too. But this is their preference. Then yellow and orange would be secondary, and also white, because there are UV markers on white flowers. We don't see it. But bees have incredible vision. They say that bees have the best vision of any animal species. And so they can pick up immediately, the thing. And then
bees in just a minute, but I wanted to just note that Diana, you have a question on milkweeds. We'll be talking about that in just a little minute. And there was another question about what are aphids classified as? Are they classified?
Aphids are hemipterums. It's a very large group of insects. Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because aphids are considered pests. But here's the point: you want insect pests in your garden, because without some insect pests, you don't get the beneficial insects, right? That keep things under control. The key word when you're talking about insect pests is control. You don't want to eliminate them. you want to control them.
And so
Because
how
as
does
long
that,
as they're there, you'll have beneficial insects.
that's great. And so if you have the beneficial insects, you're also going to have increased pollination. So it all feeds
Absolutely,
together.
absolutely, because they, every insect is a pollinator. Yeah.
Fantastic. Let's move on to the next slide. I think, oh, bees.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So we're honeybees, the essential pollinator. In other words, there are certain crops that if we didn't have honeybees, we wouldn't have a crop.
Mhm. Until
Until recently, and probably, I mean, there are 500,000 acres of almond orchards in California. People, it's crazy.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
Northern California in particular, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we supply the world. But anyway, the nonpareil, which is like the most popular variety of almond, has to be grown with a different variety in order for there to be almonds. You don't get almonds without a different pollinator. I'm saying until, and they bring beehives into the orchard in order to facilitate that cross-pollination. However, they've just developed a self-fertile variety of almond where you only need this one variety, and there is still, you're going to need help from bees, but nothing like before, because you only have this one variety, and it's self-pollinating. You don't have to cross-pollinate, right? So this is going to change. This is going to change the almond industry, because there's a huge expense involved in renting these bee colonies for pollinating purposes. Now, there are other crops as well: sweet cherries, blueberries, watermelon, squash, broccoli, that absolutely require bees. And then all your fruit trees, okay, while you don't bring in beehives, they do need bees for pollination. If you're talking about peaches, if you're talking about plums, apples are another one that absolutely need bees, because if you just grow one apple variety, you're not going to get fruit. You're going to get a little bit, but if you really want to get a significant crop, you need two different types of apple. And in order for that fruit to grow, right, you're going to have to have bees around.
And the point too, honeybees lately have been imperiled.
So that brings us to the next slide. Yeah. So for the last 20 years or so, we've had a problem with even probably going back a little bit further. Colony collapse disorder. What it means is that if I put 100 colonies of bees in my almond orchard today, a year from now I'll only have 50. Okay, what does that mean? The bees that were in the colony, and there are 50,000 bees in a healthy bee colony, the bees disappeared. Well, they didn't disappear; they died. You don't see them around the colony. You don't see them around the hive. But what happens is they're out there and they pick up. There are different factors that are affecting. The first is a varroa mite. That is the main factor. It's a mite. We saw earlier. There's these tiny little things that attach to the bees and kill them. And then there's a parasitic fungus in their gut, and then there's also a virus that kills them. And then there's habitat destruction and pesticide. So all these different factors together have had a significant impact on honeybees. The good news is that we start this every year in the spring. We start with about 2.5 million honeybee colonies in the United States. And even though 50% are destroyed, there's a big industry in marketing honeybee hive. You can order 10,000 honeybees for $150. Any of it. And by the way, in Los Angeles County, it's legal to have bees in your backyard. In Orange County, it depends on the city. You can check it out online, but you can do it if you want to.
Okay. Let's move on to some of the other bee questions. Yes.
Yeah. So this is the bumblebee. The bumblebee is special among bees because it has a very long proboscis, which means it can go further. It can go into flowers where the nectar is very deep inside. That's one point. The other point is that they're very strong flyers. They can go further than any other bee, and they have more resistance to harsh climate, be it heat, be it cold. But the most fascinating thing about the bumblebee is that if you're growing tomatoes, for instance, and there's no wind, okay, if you have bumblebees around, they will pollinate. Now, they don't transfer pollen so much, but what they do is they grab onto the petals of the tomato flower and they shake it. Their vibrations release the pollen from the tomato. And that's why in greenhouse growing of tomatoes and strawberries, they bring in bumblebees to assist in the pollination of those crops. And by the way, when you're growing tomatoes, if you don't see as much fruit as people will shake their tomato plant a couple times a day if the wind is not adequate to produce crops. It's the same principle. But if you have bumblebees around, they'll assist in that.
Let's move on to a couple other bees that you wanted to mention. The solitary.
Yeah, so the solitary bee, most bees are solitary bees. In California, there are 1,500 species of bees, and most of them, the vast majority, probably 75, 80%, maybe more even, are solitary species of solitary bees.
And we have these in our garden?
Yeah, so you can order online. You can order bee hotels. You know, it's a great thing for kids. What the bees do, and here you can see it's a very good picture, because what they'll do, they only lay about 20 eggs inside these, like you can get bamboo, you could make it yourself out of bamboo poles, right? They will lay their eggs and then they plug it up, right? You can see how they plugged it up, and then they can still, they will be able to feed, as the larvae hatch out, they will feed them pollen, they will feed them nectar, and then they will proliferate. The good thing about the solitary bees is that they, unlike the honeybee and the bumblebee, that have these what they call pollen baskets on their legs, which are really just indentations where they put pollen to bring back. The solitary bee has the pollen on its abdomen, and most of it, when they go from flower to flower, is deposited on the flower. They just bring a very little bit of it back. So they are the most efficient pollinators.
Speaking of which, Susan, sorry, Susan, I think I'm going to mess up your last name. Savolanian asks, what about carpenter bees? How do they factor into this?
Okay, so carpenter bees are solitary bees. And so, you know, they're the type of bee that you would want to create an environment where they might be interested. I mean, carpenter bees live in a lot of times wood. You'll see them in wood piles and so on. So they might be very interested in a situation of this type, where they have an opening where they can go and lay their eggs.
Interesting. We also have something in the chat that I just noticed. There was a question: how do you attract these bees to the hotel? The person said that they had put one up and no bees came.
No bees came. Well, one of the things that's very important for attracting insects is water. Okay. So I would definitely have a water source, whether it's a bird bath, or some people just put shallow dishes of water in their garden. And I would also plant something like a butterfly bush that is a profuse profuse producer of nectar.
Well,
right?
we'll get to that in a minute. I think that's part of our suggestions for what to plant for pollinators. But yeah, that's a great. So can we move on to the next slide, please? Yes.
So avocados are another one. There are two types of avocados. There are A avocados and B avocados. A avocado, now every avocado flower has male and female parts. The difference is that in A avocado, which is a has, for example, the female flower parts open in the morning, the male flower parts are open in the afternoon.
Interesting.
The B avocados, which are like bacon, fuerte, zutano, reed, the male flower part is open in the morning and the female in the afternoon. Okay, so, and there is overlap. So if you just plant a house avocado tree or just plant a fuerte, you will get some fruit, but you're not going to get the quantity that you get if you have two different, the A and the B together. So, and bees are the facilitator, right? Because they do bring, they bring bee colonies into every orchard, but after almond, the most popular fruit for bringing in bee colonies is avocado. They really do need the bees.
Since we're on avocados, we have an interesting question from Deanna Stanley. She asks, you mentioned shaking tomato plants to help produce. Does the same apply to other fruit producing plants? Can you go out and shake?
Yeah, it would only apply to those that are wind pollinated. And because, you know, the family of plants of tomato, you're talking about peppers, right? Bell peppers and chili peppers. You're talking about eggplant. You're talking about potato, right? These are all wind pollinated. So any of those, I would say, yeah, absolutely. Same principle. Yeah.
Great. Okay, on to the next slide, please, Julie. Oh, speaking of which, wind pollinated.
Yeah, so this is a point of information, but it also tells you a lot about nature, about Mother Nature. The least attractive flowers are the flowers that are wind pollinated, right? But well, since they're pollinated by the wind, they don't have to be attractive. They don't have to have fragrance. They don't have to have color, right? And so all the cereal grasses, right? The corn, wheat, rice, and oats are wind pollinated. Nut trees too have very nondescript flowers, and they're wind pollinated. We're talking about pistachio, walnut, pecan. Now they can also be aided by, there are walnuts, for instance, that they will be assisted by honeybees, but primarily they're wind pollinated, and then date palms are the same way. And it's very interesting because if for some reason the pollen isn't being spread, if there's no wind in the area, they will cut female flowers. Date palms either have a male tree or a female tree, right? This is very unusual. It's called dioecious. Most plants have perfect flowers with both male and female parts, but the date palm and the pistachio too, actually, they have a separate male tree and a female tree. So what they'll do sometimes, they'll cut female flowers, they'll cut male flowers with pollen, and they will position them in female trees. Or the other thing they've done is collect male flowers, and fly a helicopter over the orchard and drop the pollen onto the trees, onto the female trees.
Wow. This is fascinating. This is fascinating to me. Okay, so moving on, if we don't have a helicopter, maybe we can use a hummingbird feeder.
Oh, I like that. Very good. Samantha, you got it. Yeah, hummingbirds are, you know, are really good pollinators because of their long beaks, like we said before. And any kind of a tubular flower, and that can include a lot of the sages, the ornamental salvias, right? You're going to see a lot of a lot of hummingbirds around them. And then, of course, any sort of tubular flower is also going to be very attractive to honeybees. So, excuse me, to hummingbirds. Another bird that's attracted to hummingbird feeders are orioles. I don't know if you're aware, but yes. Orioles, there are orioles native to our part of the world, to our neighborhood, and there are certain plants like honeysuckle and mandevilla, which orioles will pollinate. So it's not just hummingbirds that will take advantage. Another bird that will take advantage, which was in our first slide, is bats. Okay. If you want to bring bats into your garden, bats are very good at insect control, and they also pollinate. They like to sip nectar. They like to sip sugar from hummingbird feeders. But bats pollinate agaves and night blooming cactus, right? So, and you can get a bat house. You can get a bat house online and put it up, and then you'll be able to pollinate your agaves, which, you know. Yeah, I like the most.
Bat house and a bee hotel. Why not?
A bee hotel. And by the way, if you want to, you can also bring owls onto your property as an aside. If you have a gopher problem, you know, there are owl nesting boxes that you can put up, and you'll have owls. So you could have owls, bats, and hummingbird. I mean, you know, a regular menagerie.
Well, this is interesting because we have the hummingbird feeder, we have a bird feeder here. If we're supplying this food, are they going to neglect their pollination duties with the plants?
Well, no, because here it is. They're going to be looking for nectar, right? Yeah. Wherever they can find it, and it just, you know, it's more the merrier, right?
Right. Okay.
It's like you know, if you have a store on the street and somebody opens up a similar store, they always say, what, competition is good for business?
Got it. Got it. Love it. Okay, moving on.
So, yeah. So if you're not, let's say you don't get let's say you don't have very much fruit on your plum tree this year. So what it means is that plums usually, they flower a bit late. They can flower in May.
Right.
But sometimes we'll have a late rain in May. Now, if you have rain when there are blossoms on your tree, the rain is going to bring on fungus, and that's going to kill the flowers. Or even earlier, something like apricots, right? They bloom earlier, or even almonds for that matter, right? That are the first of them. If you have rain, it can really damage the pollen, the flowers, the pollen, and so you won't get nuts or fruit. And again, when a plant is flowering, it has to be in peak health. So a lot of people will add water, especially if it's a dry spell. You want to make sure that the plant is well hydrated. And second of all, that if there's a lack of minerals because the tree hasn't been properly fertilized, that can also create a deficit in flowering. And so, of course, you won't get as many flowers. You won't have pollination and so on. Or too much nitrogen fertilizer. A lot of times people say, I get a lot of leaves. I got a very lush, gorgeous tomato plant, but I don't have any flowers. Well, the reason is that nitrogen favors the vegetative growth as opposed to the reproductive growth, right? And the vegetative growth is, you're talking about the stems and the leaf. And if you have a lot of that green growth, then you're not going to get as many flowers or fruit.
And hence not as many pollinators. But if you have this, let's talk about the daisies, which
yeah. So daisies are the quintessential plant for attracting pollinators because they have like a helipad, with a place for a helicopter to land. If you look at the Shasta daisy in the upper left, you look at the sunflower on the bottom right, you'll notice that it's a very broad base. It's easy for them to land there. They can immediately start foraging for nectar, and it's a very profitable enterprise for the pollinator. And then, of course, it's profitable for the flower because it gets pollinated and it can form seeds. We might want to say a word about sunflowers.
Yes, they've been quite in the news.
They've been in the news lately, and it's a fascinating story because it goes from the United States to Ukraine and back again. Let me explain. Sunflowers are native to the United States. The most primitive sunflowers, actually, you can find versions of them in California. There are many native, or several at least, native California native sunflowers, and they're more of a bush form, right? And the oldest sunflowers they found, which are native to the Great Plains, are in a bush form. But the native tribes in Mexico, in New Mexico and Arizona, among them the Hopi, hybridized this original sunflower into the form that we're familiar today with a single stalk and a big flower. However, the Indians and the Native Americans in the southwestern United States, they had produced a flower that was pretty good size, but it was left to, what happened was that the Spanish, that when they arrived in that part of North America, they took these sunflowers back with them and they started to grow them in Europe. And from Europe, it spread to Ukraine and Russia. And the Ukrainians and the Russians had a thing about hybridizing. And the mammoth sunflower that we see today was actually hybridized in Russia. Okay. I mean, this is a flower that can grow 12 inches across. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
Yes.
But what happened was when the Russians started coming to California, everybody's heard of the Russian River, probably in northern. The Russians came to the Midwest, they came to California. They brought with them these mammoth sunflower seeds. So what started in America and was hybridized in Russia ended back in California.
Love it.
And as a side note, Ukraine is the #1 producer of sunflower seeds today. So
fascinating. I love this. Okay, so but more lavender.
So lavender, if you want to bring bumblebees, that's a plant to have. They're very attracted to it, and again, they're the most efficient pollinators because they have very long proboscises, which can reach down into the depths of the lavender flower and extract the nectar.
Great.
So they're very good for bumblebee attraction. Other bees will come too, don't worry.
And we had a question on just a quick beat question on the solitary bees. Do they have colonies, or are they just
No, they don't have colonies. They live individually. That's why they're called solitary bees.
Solitary bees.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on from lavender, butterfly bushes.
Okay, so yeah, so this is this is the top. If you, they produce abundant nectar. They're just constant flow of nectar, and so these are the plants to bring in if you want butterflies, right? By the way, but somewhat deep, because butterflies actually are going to go deeper into a flower than bees. I don't know if you ever saw the proboscis of a butterfly, but it's pretty long. So they're especially attracted to the butterfly bush. What you see is the wand of flowers. So each one of those cones consists of hundreds of butterfly bush flowers, right? It's not that each of these cones is one flower, it consists of hundreds, right? But butterfly bush, once they're established, they're extremely drought tolerant. You'll never have to water one more than a couple times a month, even in hot weather, once they're really established on their own. So it's a good one. The one draw, I mean, it's interesting because I guess there's always another side to the coin, right? Because people say, if you want to pollinate native plants, you might be doing them a disservice, because if you bring in something like this that's so prolific in its nectar production, the native bees are going to be attracted to the imported flowers, right? And they might neglect the native flowers that they would normally pollinate. So that's just something to take into consideration. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, moving on to our next plant, milkweeds. We have a lot of questions about milkweeds.
Yeah. So
is it too late to plant them? That was one.
Not at all. Not at all. No.
Okay.
You can plant the seeds. You can plant the pole plants. If you go to any native plant nursery, they should have milkweed for sale. Okay. And speaking of which, it's preferable to plant native milkweed. And the reason for that is this. Well, there are two species of monarch butterflies in the United States. There's one that lives east of the Rocky Mountains and one that lives west of the Rocky Mountains. The one that lives east of the Rocky Mountains overwinters in Mexico. The one that's west of the Rocky Mountains overwinters along the California coast, actually all the way up beyond on the west coast. Now, if you want to attract, if you plant the tropical evergreen milkweeds on the left, you're going to mess up the biology of the monarch butterfly, because the tropical evergreen milkweed is going to grow year round. Okay, and because they grow year round, the monarch butterflies are not going to hibernate to the coast where they need to go for the winter, for their winter dormancy period, so that they can come back and then lay their eggs again in the spring, as they normally do on the native milkweed. But if they're evergreens, what happens is they hang around these plants all year. Now, some people have said, if you have the evergreen type, you want to cut them down to the ground in the fall. And that way, okay, so they'll come back in the spring, but they won't interfere with the biology, because they won't be growing during the winter season, right? But all things being equal, it's better to plant the ones on the right, the native milkweeds, because you want the butterflies to be in sync with their natural cycle.
Of course.
We're really talking about monarchs here, which, as we know, they're attracted to the special relationship between monarchs and milkweed is that when the monarch larvae eat the milkweed, there are certain alkaloids that get into their system that make them resistant to, I shouldn't say resistant, but birds stay away from them, because birds know that if they eat these caterpillars, they're going to die because they have these toxic chemicals in them. It's the only plant that can eat it's the only insect that can eat the
milkweed.
Yeah, the milkweed and survive.
This is off topic slightly from the milkweed in particular, but we were talking earlier about the attraction of pollinators to color versus scent. And you
Right.
were saying that, can you
Yeah,
talk?
we didn't go into it too much, but yeah, no, scent. Yeah, we talked earlier about most flowers that are scented are white. And
Right.
again, it's the economy of nature, right? If I can attract insects with my scent, why do I need to have color? Right? Because that's an extra expenditure of energy. You have to bring in more pigments and so on. But because bees are attracted to scent, to scented flowers, it's definitely
Right.
it's definitely a positive attraction. And beetles too, like we said, are really fascinated, are magnetized by exotic smells and fragrances. Yeah.
Right. And others to color, as we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Fascinating. Okay, next slide, please, Julie. Snapdragons.
Yeah, snapdragons are another good one for bumblebees. They really like to crawl inside and dig deep for the nectar. And one of the reasons I brought them out is, it's kind of a side thing, but you can have a snapdragon for 3 to 4 years if you never cut off the top growing point. You can see on the right flower where you see the new flowers coming up. You never want to touch that. The old flowers at the base, where you can see that they've already faded, and there's like a little round globe that forms with those you can remove, right? And you probably should, because if they go to seed, they're going to take energy away from the new flowers. But as long as you leave the tips of your snapdragons, they will continue to produce flowers.
Oh, interesting.
Probably into the fall. And they may be dormant they'll be dormant for a couple of months, but they'll grow again. Snapdragons are native to the Middle East. They're native to a Mediterranean climate. So they really feel at home in California, and they will live for several years if you let them.
And who do they attract in particular in terms of
bumblebees, but also hummingbirds.
Yeah. Okay, great. Next slide, please, Julie. Sages.
So sages, yeah. We have 2 native sages here on the bottom right and the bottom left. Sages are famous for attracting hummingbirds, in particular. And they will also attract bumblebees again, because some of them, you can see that there's a depth to the flower, and the nectaries are always at the base of the flower petals. So yeah, sages are one of the ones that I really like. Is the one in the middle, anise sage, highly recommended. It's not maybe as well known, Salvia guaranitica, because the foliage of the anise sage has a very strong fragrance of anise, right? So that gives it an extra special quality. But they're very durable sages, and they last a long time. And the flowers are in the blue and the purple range.
Great. Okay, next slide. We have quite a few questions too, but I want to get through your slides.
Oh, okay.
So mint family members.
So yeah, so the mint family, because again, the fragrance of the leaves is going to be attractive to bees, and the flowers as well. I guess if I would single out one plant, the bottom left, lemon balm, it's the most salubrious mint, member of the mint family. And there's a report of somebody who drank mint tea for breakfast every morning and lived to be 108. So it's
break out the mint tea.
It's a good.
Is lemon balm as invasive as mint can be?
I would say no. I would say no. It's prolific, and it self-sows. It easily will seed itself, but you can cut it back. No, it's not as invasive as mint. I know what you mean, that it tends to grow out really quickly, but no, it's not like that.
Interesting. Okay.
And basil is a very good attractant.
Basil. I love
So
it.
yeah, trumpet vines, hummingbirds, trumpet vines, right? You put them together. The one I would draw to your attention to is in the upper left. It's called Esperanza, some type of yellow bells, orange bells. What's special about this plant is that it is in bloom virtually all the time. It's we often think of bougainvillea as a plant that's always colorful, but this is a very, very close second. It's not as well known. It's starting to become more well known, because it's always in bloom. And yeah, the other ones, The other ones are nice too. They're, these vines are good for covering a fence, especially a chain link fence. Right? You don't know what to do with it, and it's kind of an eyesore. But you plant any one of these along a chain link fence, it'll take it over. Or if you just want a trellis, right? You put up a trellis, then the vine is going to grow right up.
We have a trumpet vine that I just love. I'm curious about the water requirements for trumpet vines.
Yeah, here's the thing with water, and it's like, we're always talking drought tolerant. If your plants are well mulched and they're mature, and if you have a drip system in place, right?
You're good.
Watering is going to become an afterthought.
You're good.
You may be watering never more than twice a week, right? And often not even that often. If you have 3 inches of mulch around your plants, you're not going to have to water very much.
Okay. And
there are a lot of sources free. If you Google free mulch and then you Google your city, you're going to find places where you can just go pick it up for free.
Great. Love it. Okay. I'm sorry. I got you sidetracked there. Native plants.
Yeah. So this is a big deal. Let me tell you why this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Let's look at the sphinx moth in the upper right. Sphinx moths lay eggs that turn into caterpillars that are very voracious feeders, and they're pests. There's something called a tomato hornworm. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these. It looks like something out of Alice in Wonderland. It's like this giant, right?
Yeah.
If you have native plants in your garden, they're going to attract sphinx moths, maybe not the same one, that are going to lay their eggs, and they're going to have their own larvae. I don't know if it dimensions of the tomato hornworm, but what's going to happen is you're going to get beneficial parasitic wasps coming in to lay their eggs in this offending larva, even though it's on a native plant, right? Native plants also get that. But the point being, now when you plant your tomatoes, as soon as something like a tomato hornworm will appear, those beneficial insects that have been feeding on the pests that have been attracted to the natives are now going to carry over and feed on the tomato hornworm in your tomato plant before it gets too big, before it turns into that.
Interesting. Oh my God.
So that's a good, because
to the rescue always, right? Doesn't it come back to that? Do we have any more burning desires for slides, or can I get to some of these questions?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Let me.
Slides are good. But
let me ask Debbie, as Debbie Stouffer wanted to know, going back to bees, do you need to clean out those bee hotels every once in a while?
I don't think so. I mean, they're going to take care of business. Yeah. Okay.
Another thing on bees from Marietta Fong, she wants to know, is there a local source for solitary bees? She says they had some shipped, but there was a low survival rate.
Well, solitary bees are everywhere. You're saying for your bee hotel. Yeah, somebody asked that question before. I have a bee hotel and nobody showed up.
Right.
And I think, again, you have to make sure you have a water source. Okay. Yeah. There's a lot of information. There are certain types of things you can put out as food, attractants. Okay. Mm-hmm. That will, something with protein in it that will be attractive. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but there are things you can put. Any type of beneficial insect that you bring into your garden. By the way, it's people that have looked into this now more thoroughly say, you know what, buying insects and bringing them in is not as wise at the end of the day than having the plants that attract them and the conditions for them to prosper. Having the water, and by the way, one of the sources that we might want to look at, the LA Exposition Park in downtown LA near USC, they have bee hotels in their garden, and it would be interesting to see how they have achieved success in bringing in the bees and keeping the bees. But I think native plants might be one direction to go, because we have 1,500 species of native bees, and almost all of them are solitary. So if you brought in native plants and a hotel, then they would be more likely to stick around.
I just saw a question related to that come up through the chat as I was looking. Is there a place in particular that the bee hotels should rest in the garden?
I would say I would put them near a water source.
Okay,
I'd put them
great.
near a bird bath, or, just dishes that you keep filled with water. Yeah.
Sounds good. And Ryder wants to know, one of her butterfly bushes in a container looks dead. Could it be hibernating, or does she need to start over?
Well, butterfly bushes in the winter, they do don't go into a type of decline. I mean, what you want to do is in any plant, you always want to look at the new growth, like at the very tips. Everything can be dead, but as long as at the very tips, the terminal parts of the shoots are showing new growth, then the plant is going to be fine.
Oh, interesting.
But with containers, you want to be careful. You don't want to overwater. You don't want to underwater. It's always a delicate situation. But one of the best mixes for container plants is a cactus mix, because it drains so well.
Uh-huh.
I think if anything, people are more inclined probably to overwater than underwater. And with a cactus mix, even though it's obviously geared to cactus. For instance, if you're growing citrus in a container, a lot of people recommend a cactus mix.
Right. We have a pollination question from Nina Nazarian. She wants to know, are my oddly shaped strawberries due to poor pollination?
Yes,
You recommend
absolutely. Yep. That comes into play. You have to have sufficient bee activity for those fruit to become to fill out like that. Yeah, because the seeds on a strawberry, very interesting. They're like the only seed. They're on the outside, right? Those little prickly things on the outside of a strawberry?
Yeah.
Those are the seeds. They're called achenes. Yeah. Right. And you see how many there are. And in order to get that many and that plump look, you have to, because remember, the seed is responsible for the growth of the fruit.
Perfect. So back to milkweeds. Diana often has a question. She says, I have a milkweed plant in my yard and noticed that they are infested with tiny yellow bugs. Right. Are they harmful to monarch butterflies and the chrysalis?
Okay, so this is a very good, I'm glad you brought that up. So those are aphids. Uh-huh. And you got to be really careful not to do anything that will discourage the monarchs from what should I say, proliferating on that plant. Uh-huh. You don't want to spray anything, first of all. The only thing, what I would do is I would take a Q-tip, in alcohol and just rub it on those aphids, because you take a strong jet of water, which is, obviously non-toxic, but that strong jet of water could knock off the eggs of the butterfly.
Right.
So you want to be very specific. And if you do have a Q-tip with rubbing alcohol, that's only going to take care of whatever it touches, right? So you remove the aphids in that way. Or you just rub them off with your fingers. Some people are squeamish, but that's the safest way, right? You can put on a glove, you have gardening gloves.
Yeah, well, that's what the 99-cent store is for me to buy gardening gloves. Pamela Torres, a couple more questions and then we have to wrap up. Pamela Torres asks, honeybee question again, can honeybees exist with other type of bees? We have the Africanized hybrid in our area, she says.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. I mean,
yeah,
they're fine. I mean, they're fine. Okay. Like I said, the problem is that the honeybees are going to be there. They're going to be there, but I think that the killer bee thing did not turn out to be the big, the threat that we thought it was.
Yeah. We have a question from Susan Eastman, I think is a good one. She says, we seem to always hear not to have standing water because of the mosquitoes.
Ah, very good.
And yeah. So
there's always a second day, right? But let me tell you something. There are now, Israeli scientists invented something. There are these discs that you can drop into water, and no mosquitoes will visit the water. Okay.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. 100%. Yeah. I don't remember what it is now, but it's an anti-mosquito remedy, right? You drop this in. It's something biological. That keeps the mosquitoes from laying their eggs there. Or if they lay their eggs, they'll be consumed by whatever this is. I think it's a bacteria actually that will take care of it, but it won't it won't contaminate the water for other creatures. Yeah.
We have one more question, and I think it's very specific, but it brings us back to the beginning somewhat. This is from Deborah Louie, and she asks, are potential yucca moth larvae the reason we remove the reproductive parts of yucca blossoms before cooking and eating them? Do you know?
Oh, wait. Before you eat the yucca blossom, I don't
She
understand.
says, let me read it again. She says,
Right,
are
right.
potential yucca moth larvae the reason we remove the reproductive parts of yucca blossoms before cooking and eating them? Great question.
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way. The adult, I don't think so, because at the time that you're harvesting these flowers, I don't think that. I mean, it sounds like, are you afraid of endangering them, or are you afraid of eating the eggs? I'm not quite sure what the problem is.
Bugs.
But,
Come
yeah.
on.
So
Eating bugs.
in the sense that the bugs can be at the obvious. I mean, I guess if you're just eating the petals, maybe that's what she's trying to say. Then you would, that bulbous part at the bottom of the female part of the flower potentially could contain the eggs, and I guess could contain some larvae. So I guess that probably would make sense.
Well, listen, we could talk about this all day. I could talk to you all day. Thank you so much, but that's all the time we have.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you for attending today. Joshua's column runs on Sundays, so be sure to
Actually, Saturday. It's actually Saturday.
And Saturday, excuse me, that's what I meant. Saturday's paper, and of course online in our publications. And his website is thesmartergardener.com. And if you want more gardening insights from our experts, sign up for our Garden Party newsletter. And now's a good chance to catch up on the virtual programs you might have missed this year. So just go to scng.com/virtual events, and you're going to be able to see some of our upcoming shows, like Bookish this Friday with John Cho, Christina Wong, and Wajahat Ali. If you'd like to share your thoughts from today, or if you have additional questions, always give us an email at events@scng.com. We're always interested in your feedback. And if you're not a subscriber, I got to say it again, but you want to get in on all the entertainment and information we always offer, just give us a call at 877-469-6133. And again, thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time, I hope. Bye.